Rix Road explodes, metaphorically and literally, in the heart-stopping finale of this season. G'day, welcome to the Nerdy Dad channel, and my review and discussion of the season finale of Andor. Episode 12, Rix Road, was directed by Benjamin Caron, and by the time this video comes out, it'll have almost been a week, so I've had a lot of time to sit with it, dig in. I've got a lot of thoughts. I don't have much else to say before I dive into spoilers, so there's your spoiler warning, let's get into it. Last week I said Marva hung over the episode, and if anything, that is even more so in the finale. The spirit of Starman Pack also hangs over his son Wilman, as we see him building a bomb in the opening scene, but we'll get back to that in a moment. Before I get into everything that happens on Ferrix, I want to briefly talk about the storylines that are wrapped up on Coruscant. The episode only takes a couple of minutes in the ISB headquarters to wrap up the Krieger arc. No one rides to the rescue, their cell is wiped out, sacrificed by Luthen to protect Lonnie. We're told the ambush was quick and there were no survivors. Storyline wrapped up and there's not a lot else to say about it. We get two scenes with Mon Mothma. In the first, we get to see her have a private conversation in the car with her husband, where she accuses him of gambling on Coruscant, which sounds like it's entirely believable because he's probably done it before. Look, Perrin isn't the most likable character by any stretch of the imagination. But to be fair, in this case, I don't think he's got any idea what's going on, and he's being used to feed in false information to the ISB, which we get to see in another scene, where the driver dutifully hands the information over to Inspector Blevin of all people, who we find out was aware of the irregular movement of Mothma money, so it's probably a good thing that Mon acted when she did. And look, towards the end of the episode, we also get a scene when we find out that Mon Mothma has conceded to introduce her daughter to Davos Goldwyn. Not to intentionally skip over Stecken and Leader's names, but in the end, their importance to the story is simply to be the children of influential people. Look, I've got a lot of thoughts about Mon Mothma's story, across the cut, so canon adjacent Revenge of the Sith scene, across Andor, Rebels, Rogue One, Return of the Jedi, and what we know from the novels. So I might come back and do another video on this, but for now, let's get to Ferrix, where the vast majority of the action of this episode takes place. At the start of the episode, Ferrix is a tinderbox, and all it was ever going to take was a single spark. We've seen the events that have led up to this. The Empire has cracked down on the planet hard, ever since the corporate cops botched the arrest of Cassian, and even more so since Deidre's took control of the planet. Marva, despite being at the end of her life, had been inspired, radicalized even, to be a rebel ever since the events in Aldhani. Cassian was headed back to Ferrix in the wake of his mother's death. Deidre, Luthen, and even Cyril are all headed back to Ferrix on the assumption that Cassian was going back to Ferrix. And fireworks were bound to ensue. And then two of the three opening scenes are Wilman Pack making a bomb under the watchful eye of a hologram of his dead father. Keeping on the theme of fathers, the first place we see Cassian visit when he arrives on Ferrix is Clem's brick. And then he remembers cleaning components with Clem, who gives him a speech, which might well as be about people as it is about cleaning old parts.
People don't look down the way they should. They don't look down, they don't look past the rust. Not us, though, eh? Eyes open, possibilities everywhere.
This episode, hell, this whole season has just been full of wonderful monologues, and Clem's is just the warm-up in this episode. There's at least two more monologues that come from a dead Andor that are even better. Look, if I didn't think it'd be a clear copyright problem, I'd like to sit back and just do an epic monologue compilation from all of this first season of Andor. Nemec, Luthen, Kino, Marva, hell, even Major Partagaz. There's a lot to choose from. Look, Pelger informs Cassian of Bix's fate and sets up his meeting with Brasso, which leads us to the words that Brasso passed on to Cassian from his deceased mother.
When the day comes that those two pull together, he will be an unstoppable force for good.
Which is not the last words from Marva we get to hear. This is what the whole episode, the whole season is building towards. The Empire had permitted a small area for the funeral. Only 40 mourners at 2 o'clock. But 2 hours earlier, at 12, hundreds of mourners. What feels like the whole town turns up to send Marva off. Now there's a bunch of plot threads going on at the same time on Ferrix, and I've somehow managed to skip entirely over Cinta and Vel. And their story is important to them, and I understand their story is also important to a segment of the community. But in this episode, they do little to drive the plot forward. They're just they're there. Luthen's much the same. On Ferrix, he is witnessing rebellion. He's not directly doing anything to execute it. Although it is Aldani that inspired Marva, who in turn gave a speech that was the spark that ignited Rix Road.
If I could do it again, I'd wake up early and be fighting these bastards from the start. Fight the Empire!
And doesn't it ignite? Marva said she wished she'd woken up earlier so she could fight the Empire. So I don't think she'd have any problem at all with Grasso using her remains as a bludgeoning weapon. At the same time as this is going on, for the second time this season, somebody informs on Andor. This time to the Empire. However, by the time Deidre gets to where Andor was, he is gone. Andor came to Ferrix to say goodbye to his mother. However, once he found out about Bix, that became his priority. So he wasn't there to be caught. And also for the second time this season, the person who squealed on Andor was on the wrong end of instant karma, because Willman upped the stakes of the uprising when he threw his homemade bomb at the Imperial line. Last week I predicted that, other than Andor, I didn't think too many people were getting out of this episode alive. And I was wrong. This wasn't a victory. Look, this uprising definitely did not earn those who remain anything other than more oppression. And I say those who remain because a lot of people died. When they were finally given the order to fire, the stormtroopers did not miss their targets. But it just wasn't any of the point of view characters. It wasn't any of the people we're following. With a few exceptions, the Fallen were not even named characters. Bix, Brasso, B2, Luthen, Cinta, and Vel all survived along with Cassian. As did Deidre and Cyril. Cyril saved Deidre from the mob, and they have their, let's call it a moment. But here's the thing. I think next season Deidre might be finished. I mean, she's stuffed. The funeral was allowed on her orders. There was no snipers on her orders. And the guards didn't open fire earlier because of her orders. She survived Ferrix, but I think she'll be lucky to survive the trip back to Coruscant. I think Ferrix has buried her career, much as it did Cyril's. I mean, I could always be wrong about this. I'll tell you from riding 2 years. At the end of the episode, Andor finally winds up where I thought he was going to be at the end of episode 3. He joins Luthen in his rebellion, ready to do what must be done. And there is so much more to say about this episode, so much more to say about this series, but I'm going to pull it up here for the night. Look, if you've stuck with me this far, why don't you give the video a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. This is the Nerdy Dad, signing off.